Hello, my name is Rob Garner. I'm a computer programming instructor, and today I'm going to demonstrate how to use HTML helpers with .NET MVC. So I've got a starting project here. It's already got a home controller, a submit data controller, and if I run this, let's see what it does. And we have this little application where we can add menu items. And it appears to be working. So we saw how we can use standard HTML forms in order to build our front end for an application. In order to make it a little easier, .NET also includes things called HTML helpers, which allow us to, different ways of creating our inputs and other items on a control. And if you've ever worked with web form applications, it's a HTML helper is a little bit like a web form control, but it's a little bit more restrained in what it does and in its complexity. So let's add another controller to demonstrate this, and we're going to call this one helper controller. And so, again, another simple controller method that returns a view. And we're going to add a view. And we're not going to use a layout page for this one. We're just going to add a empty view. And we're going to replace the code that's there with using HTML.beginForm. And we're going to use this, and our HTML helpers begin with the word HTML, and then you put it, and then you put a dot in the function name. And you can see that this view is, for the most part, made almost entirely using Razor code. In fact, I'm going to get rid of that little piece of HTML that was lingering along. So let's try this and see what it results in. And we can see that we do, in fact, have our display name, and then we have our checkbox. And if I look at the page source, we can see that that rendered form tags essentially. So this using HTML begin form actually created our form tags. And then inside of that, we got our inputs, which are or our text here, check this or not. And then we had an input for our checkbox. Notice that the checkbox gets 2 inputs. And the reason for that is the first one is the regular checkbox. The second one is a hidden version of that is defaulted to false. And that's because if someone submitted this form and did not check the checkbox, you wouldn't have a true or false value associated with check 1. So by having this hidden field which associates false with check 1, the default value will be false rather than just being empty. Let's add another controller to our helper controller. So we're going to pass in this menu to a view, and then of course we need to add a view. Actually, this time let's make it with a using the default layout. So I'm going to delete that one that was created, and then redo it, add view, using a layout page. And we're going to use an HTML helper for display name. and then another one for display. And let's see what we get. And you can see that these helpers automatically figure out that we passed in a class object with the view, and then it's just looking for a property called text, and then it displays it, and then another one called category, and we can see that it in fact displays it. So fairly easy workflow. In your controller, take a class, pass it in as the model. In your view, just use the HTML helpers to display the fields you want to display, and it just does it. Let's add another controller. So another helper, or another action result. This one just returns the view, and then we develop the view. We're going to null out the layout. And we'll use the text box HTML helper. And we're going to put in a anonymous class that has some attributes. We're going to pick required is equal to required, max length is equal to 15. And we're going to set a class attribute. And we can see we get our text box, our label, or our H2 up here, and then we have these attributes. Let's look at the page source, and we can see this at class was converted into the actual class for the element, the input element. Its ID field was set to text1. Max length was set. So basically this class is just rendered as attributes. So you can set the attributes for an HTML control just by adding this anonymous class object, and what will happen is the fields in this class will just be rendered as attributes in the HTML object. So that's how you can set attributes that are maybe not explicitly set within the HTML helper. Going back to our controller, let me clear some of this previous work out a little bit. Let's create another controller method. To use this menu model, we're going to have to add a using directive for models. So that's needed to point to this models directory so that for a strongly typed view, we have an actual reference to that model. And we could have done that one up here as well, so I'll just switch that over to a menu. And just take this one. Again, I'm going to add a view. I'm going to set the layout to null just for the demo so that we can see. So when we look at, and I do that just so that when we view source, we don't have everything in the HTML. Normally you would not null out your view or your layout. So here it's adding a directive, or we're setting the model type equal to menu, and what this does is so what we do is we assign the model to be a menu. This strongly types the menu, which makes it easier to access things within the view. So here, if I use a display name for, I can then use a lambda expression and just say, rather than having to type in the element for it, I can just use the property for the text element for menu. And actually I wanted to do a display name for here, and then do a display for here. And so what we get is we have, we're going to display the name for text and then display text down below it. When we run this, we get the name for text, which is text, and then down here we get the what's actually stored in text with the display for. If I look at the source, we can see what's actually rendered. And so whenever you're working with this MVC stuff, it's useful to display source and see what these HTML controls actually do. In this case, you can see it just writes the name of the property out. And then for the display for, or at least the display name just displays the name of the property. The display for actually goes in and just displays the value. So the almost key value. We can also add a text box, which is html.textbox4. And again, we'll use our notation here to display the text. And so we have a display name, which displays the name of the text, a display for, which displays what's in here, and then text box 4. And you can see now we have a text box with the value inside of it. So that would allow the user to change a value. Let's look at the page source for this. It's a little bit more complex, but you can see that the text box 4 renders an actual input control. And you can see the attributes for this control. And if we look at our model class, we can see that for the text, we have this string length attribute set to 50, and that's here. And it automatically generated a data validation length, a required attribute, and then the ID field, the name, and the type were generated along with its initial values. So if I go back and look at this, we don't have a submit button, but if we did, then those validation elements would come into effect if our controller had validate enabled. Let's add another controller method. And then add a view. And we're just going to do, in this case, we're going to say create an editor for passing a lambda expression for M, for basically all the models in the menu. You could actually use this to limit what you display, but in this case we're going to do it for the entire menu. And if we run that, we very simply get an editor for the entire set of fields. So that's a convenient way of maybe quickly making a menu to edit data in a model. So now we have the ability to set input. Then the next thing we want to do is be able to get the input back from the user and submit it to a action result method. So we have an action result for an index already. And actually, I think I'm going to put it down here. We're going to use our HTTP post attribute. And we'll look at the model state, see if it's valid. So if it's valid, we will display what we created. If not, we'll say not valid, and we'll send the user back to index. And for our index method up here, we're going to add a view. And we'll display the info value, and then using HTML begin form. And you'll notice that you have several overloads for the begin form. We're going to use the one that's going to use 3 parameters. Which will have the action name, the controller name, and then the form submission method. In this case, so it'll be submit data, comma, and we're going to use the helper controller, and then we're going to use the post method, and that'll bring us to this submit data one that we created using post. And we'll use validation summary, which returns an unordered list of validation messages. And we'll need this for ID, text, price, category, we'll finish it with a submit button so it actually executes this action in the form. And let's see what we have. And we have a fairly decent looking form. And we can fill in some information. Click submit. And it looks like I misspelled submit. Let's try that again. And we can see main area was created, so it successfully called that submit. If I omit something, let's see what happens. Not valid. So this appears to be working. We can use a strongly typed menu, perhaps using this. Specify a menu and then let's see if we can just and yeah, we could just have done a strongly typed model and then an editor for, and we would have gotten much the same sort of thing. Of course, we didn't want the date field, so that may be a limitation of using this editor for, but you get the idea. And that completes my demonstration of HTML helpers. Thank you very much.